Hello friends, welcome back once again. So this is our UI5 learning series, and in this episode we'll basically talk about, or rather extend our discussion on the CRUD operations that we started. We created this application and you can find it in my GitHub repository under UI5 learning series, and the branch that we pushed last time was the fake rest.cnn. I just updated a little bit of changes. So if you just clone this particular branch, then probably you can follow along this tutorial. So with this tutorial, we created an application runs on the mock server, which is a TechRest and Sinan powered. And this is the data that it can shows all the local JSON model, which is the mock server dot HTML. That is our index file. Whereas the actual index file is index.html, and we don't have any data over here because it is not linked to any backend server. So in this episode, our aim should be to link the backend server, and I'll prefer to link a CAP server, which is by default provides an v4 version. So this is what the server that I'm planning to link up. It's a v4 version powered by Express, and this is the JSON, which is a product model. And the purpose of using the backend server as a CAP, because that we can use it for making our CRUD operations easier with the real server, real kind of a backend server. Because if we use the Northwind data model, it will be difficult or challenging because it will not allow to perform any data modification, right? So that's the reason. If we just go back, this is my CAP homepage. So this is what the products that I'm planning to use it. All right, so this was our particular query that we made a jQuery or kind of an Ajax call, and that time the URL was the products. So as per our goal, so let's change this URL with our particular service URL that you're planning to link with our application, so that this is all I just want. So if I just save this one, ideally I'll be able to get the data and everything should work as it is, right? That's the intention. So let's check this application is working or not. And if I run, yep, no data is coming still. So let's see what's going wrong. That is what the purpose. So if we just check the console to see if any error happens, and yes, indeed, something kind of an access control allowed, which a CORS policy issue. So this is called cross-origin resource sharing problem, and this is basically a protection that's been made so that in layman terminology, the client, which is our UI5 application, is running from the port 8080, whereas our backend server, as it's powered by CAP, it's running on a different server, right? It's a port 004, and that is what the port, right? Maybe from the same local machine, but their listening ports are too different. So that's a cross-origin resource sharing is the protection that's been allowed. I mean, the policy been in work, and it is actually failing to satisfy this kind of a conflicts. So it is not allowing eventually to perform the gate operation from this CAP service. And this is a very basic fundamental problem. Every UI5 beginners get into these issues. So definitely we'll fix this problem and see what are the different possibilities. So while we had web ID as an ID, that time we used to have the new app.json. So we used to create a destination, and from our web ID, we basically try to link the OData service, which is actually connected with our cloud system with the destination service, and which which is actually behaving as a proxy, and that eventually is to resolve our CORS policy using that mapping with the new app.json. But in Eclipse-based development, there is a concept called web.xml, so where we can also put the proxy, and that way we can resolve this CORS issue. But in our specific application, which we have built in the VS Code, we'll be using a latest technology that is called the UI5 web tooling to fix this problem. So this is an npm module that, so it's an UI5 middleware simple proxy module. So that the thing that we are going to use it in our application. So there are certain setup and configuration that been asked us to perform. So let's follow along. So what they are doing, they are just adding up this kind of a dependency, node dependency under dev dependencies section. So open our application, go to package.json, and we can add it over here under the library load. We'll be adding this one as a, oh my bad, it should be under dev dependencies, right? So not here. So let's put it over here. And under UI5 dependencies, we'll be adding only this thing. Let's see quickly what it says. Yes, under dependencies sections, we'll be adding the simple proxy, right? So these two changes in the package.json. It also says something, a configuration at the UI5 descriptor, which is an UI5.yml file. And under the custom middleware, we can use this particular configuration setup. So let's copy it. Certain things will change, of course. So let's go to UI5.yml file. Where is our file? Here is it. This is a little tricky. Make sure you are follow along the tab and spaces properly. So let's say this name is fine, but the rest of the things are all messed up. So let's just select it and put a tab so that it should follow along. Now we don't need any of this setup. I just need till base URL, and it's a given example with our Northwind service or serviceodata.org, and we'll want to change it in this setup a little bit. So this is the base URL. So if we go to our cap, so this is the base URL till port 4004. That is what I want to set it up as a base URL. I want to change it over here and put it as a HTTP localhost 4004. So that is being, kind of a mount path, which is nothing, but it calls it as a alias, right? Something, a proxy. That is, you can put any name, you can put proxy also. That's pretty fine, no problem. So let's save all these three. Will it still work? No, of course, we have to use this proxy in our component.js. So we added this thing. So this enter 4004, we have to set it up as, oh, sorry, not OData, but proxy, right? That is what the term we added. That's all. Save it. Will it work? No, because we have added this npm dependency. So let's stop this server for the time being and run npm install so that it installs these dependencies under node modules. I'm pausing this video. Yeah, it's all downloaded successfully. So you can rerun npm run start, and it will open our index.html. So the moment I start it, and it's auto restarted basically, and it is giving me the data, and no more this CORS issue we are able to see. That's pretty easy to set up a proxy, and locally you can develop any application, any backend service you can map it to, and this dev dependencies model will help to get rid of this CORS problem. It's all good, but the setup that we have done over in this component.js is not acceptable, or it's not a traditional practice. In general, we have to do our setup from manifest.json, which is the kind of a UI5 main backbone, or all set of configurations that we can find it over here. Now to start with, what we have to do, we are basically dealing with the before model. So we have to set up our configuration accordingly. So here we can find the models, right? So the default model that you can find is an i18n. And now we can add it up little configurations for our Northwind, and we can call it any name, comma, and then paste this kind of a configuration. So I want to call it, the model name is Northwind because it's just a kind of a Northwind I'm just trying to, and kind of a setup that is I'm just adding it up. So we can discuss it later, but the synchronization mode is none, is kind of a mandatory setup that is needed for the v4 model to serve. Once we add it up, let's just go little top, and under SAP UI5 app section, right, we have to add the data source, and this is the kind of a configuration that we can add it up. So I'm just would like to copy paste rather than typing. This kind of a service is basically a Northwind service, and we'll see and the things over here. So I'm just removing it for the time being. So this is kind of a setup, same thing as you have followed along just now. We are just adding, instead of OData, we have to put proxy. All good. So let's save all. So now what will happen if I just see our application, it is restarted. Let's see what's going on. The data is still coming. Let's go a little to our network. And this is the product, right? So this is the product is actually, if you link headers, it is taking this proxy main products, okay? But it is actually calling our same query, right? the same component.jsm Ajax query is being called. Okay, and that is actually working. So if we just put a breakpoint over here, so I've just put a breakpoint on the jQuery .get, which is an Ajax call, and in the success call back. If I just refresh it, let's see where it goes. So first it's stuck to the Ajax.get, right? And if I put F8, it goes to the success callback, and in the data I have the value with all the informations, right? That's cool. But it's coming again the data till 76 records, because it's just making a call toward the main products, right? Our cap service, which is actually serving 76 records. All right, so that is what I'm getting over here. Okay, so if I just execute and I'm able to see the data because of the binding. So now, is there a way to get the data from the OData model directly? Because the manifest.json, where we have just set up our stuff, right? So this is actually the OData model that we are just binding, right? So the type is OData, as you can see, right? So instead of jQuery or Ajax call, I would prefer to make a call directly on this OData model. But how to do that? So first comment this specific query, because we are trying with the OData model directly. So create certain empty lines. And now let's understand, like when you are dealing with this query with the OData model, again, I'm just emphasizing we are dealing with the V4 model. Okay. So there is a difference between V2 and V4. So obviously, if I just get the model like this dot get model, and the model name what we have declared, just a second, go to manifest once again. This is the model name, not win, right? So copy it so that no typing error. So now this is the OData model that we have got. But if we run V2 model, we can basically make read as a function, right? And we can basically put the entity like products, okay, followed by certain callback functions that we can put success and error. Okay, but when we're dealing with the V4 model, this doesn't work. Okay, so what we have to do, we have to run bind list, this kind of a function, and we have to put the entity same way, products, that's all. Okay, so I think it should be double quote, that's the warning for the TypeScript level. So just a second. Yeah, so this is all set, and let's put it under a variable called olist. Okay, so now once we get this olist, we need to just use this olist, and we have to just say request context, and now we have the option to, and interestingly, unlike the V2 model, V4 model actually sends as a promise. Okay, so now we have a provision to use a then and function, and we can put something called OData as a response, and we can, I'm just using an arrow function. Okay, now the thing is, as a promise, I'm using a then. You could also use async await, but anyway, just to make this simpler, I'm just using a then function, and you can do whatever you like. All right, so remember, this is actually a context, not the data, that we can check it with the debugger find option. So let's now run it once again. Let's see what it does. Yeah, all right, it's actually, the previous thing was loading up. So now it's stuck with the debugger, means our data actually got received, and voila, it is actually, and it is all 76 entries, but it is not the data, it is just the context for the specific ID of the products, right? So we need to write little bit of JavaScript to get the data out of this context. So let's do that. So this is basically a context, array of context. So let's create an array called products as an empty array. Okay, I think that's all. So now this OData is the array again. So we can write something called for each function. We don't need array, of course, because OData itself is an array. So it will just look through each context and it will provide an element, and that I can manage it over here within this arrow function. All right, so now it writes element, and then I'll be running the get object, this function. And once we do this, this object will return me the object. So I'm calling it as var products, or why I'm doing this, can't I do this way, products dot push, because this is an array, and within that we just call it. So that is within this array, right? It is actually looping through all the context, get the object and push it to this array. So that way my products gets filled up with all the data. And so once I get this, what next we are doing over here, this is the thing we are doing, right? So once we get it, we have to just load our app model, but not OData.value, but we basically need to fill up with our products, because that is the array of objects that is just loaded. I think that's all right. So let's save it. What will happen? So let's execute once again so that it will reload, and it will come back to our debugger once again. Oh, all right. So again, I have to, yeah, now it's debugger. So our code is now reflecting. So let's do small thing and let's execute. So yeah, it is all right. So get object, and if I just run, so my products is filled up with the first data. Awesome, right? So if I just execute, oh, let's remove this breakpoint, and voila, I see the data. Awesome, right? So we can now get the data from a model, which is an OData model directly that we are just linked to, but this time it is a get model and bind list. So every data been fetched out of this service and it's mapped to. But ideally, we could bind this particular products, right, directly to our table. End-to-end element binding, list binding, we could do this. Then with a scroll, basically I would have received the newer data set. If we could put a threshold value, we could make a more kind of an option you would see to fetch more records, right, than dump everything at a shot. So this is the downside if you just use a JSON model as an in-between rather than having a OData model directly. But the pro part is, like, if you do this, you have now control to manipulate the data within this kind of callbacks or within the promise resolved section. You can mold certain data and you can attach it to the list or the table as you have the elements. So it's all depends on the complexity of the requirement and the necessity based things. But anyway, this is kind of the backend service now is actually a link to our application, and we are still able to make our query working to get the data from. So a lot of things you have learned, like how to make a CORS issue, how to make a query on the V4 model. Now, if it is a V2 model, there are a little bit of changes that we have to do because general people starts with the V2 model. So in the V2 model, we have to change this to 2.0, but our service will not work because my service is a cap service, and it basically provides V4 model as a default. Now to downport the cap to V2, there is an adapter that we can implement a very few lines of code, and that would make a downport from V4 to V2, and we could use this same service but with a V2 option. Okay, and of course the logic that we have written over here to parse the data within component would have been changed, right? Because this bind list is no more required, because that time we'll be using a read function, not the bind list. And this kind of a request context is not readed, because within that read function you could have a provision to pass the object contains the success and error callbacks, and we can manipulate things over there, and that doesn't return a promise, right? So that's the way we could manage things. So in the next episode, plan is now to make our application a little more kind of an application means I am to add a detail page so that I can see the data, because the moment we want to create the new records, we need a screen to update all the values to create the new products, right? So obviously we need certain fresh page or kind of a navigation to open, and that way we can still progress on the rest of the other CRUD methods. I hope this discussion was helpful, and we'll stay connected, and in the next episode, as I said, we'll keep progressing on this CRUD on the UI5 trees. Stay tuned.